Hello and welcome to the Big Four Draft Podcast, doing a special NFL Draft special with my good friends Ian and Derek. Ian, first of all, how are you and your cat doing today?
We're pretty good. We're pretty good. She's been jumping all over me already, so it'll be a fun evening. But yeah, things are good, man. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Is she a fan of Jameis Winston?
I think she's more of a Marcus Mariota type girl.
And Derek, how are you doing today?
I'm alright. Just got out of school pretty recently, so.
Sounds good. All right, so on today's show, we're going to be talking obviously about the NFL Draft, starting with the quarterbacks, Marcus Mariota, Jameis Winston, who Ian and Derek have as their number one quarterback, some of the upsides and high ceiling floor with them. Also talk about the number three quarterback in this class, running backs, wide receivers, edge rushers, cornerbacks, basically the primary key positions. So we're going to start with the quarterbacks and the number one topic that's been going on for a lot, pretty much all year. Jameis Winston, Marcus Mariota. Derek, we'll start with you. Who is your number one quarterback?
I have Winston as the number one guy. I was riding with Mariota for a while after like my first kind of preliminary pass through. Uh, but then I watched him again, probably like towards the end of the playoff, like right after the college football playoff. Watched them all again. There were a couple more games out for both of them, and I got a little more attached to Jameis Winston. I think there's definitely a little bit less of a learning curve with him, and people like Mariota more because he's a little more consistent and he's not as scary of and aggressive as a player as Winston. But in all honesty, like I'm completely okay with a guy being high variance like Jameis Winston. We've seen these high variance guys go out and win Super Bowls plenty of times before because if they get hot, they're absolutely scary. Um, and I don't not like Mariota. Like he's still a first-round quarterback. I think he's going to be good in the NFL. I think he's going to be sort of Tannehill level quarterback who's very good. Um, but if I'm a team picking number one, I'm taking Winston.
And Ian, what about you?
Yeah, I agree. I've got Winston number one. Hasn't really been too close for me since last year. And that's not a slight on Mariota either. You look at what works in the NFL, and you look at the majority of quarterbacks right now that are in like the top 10 to 12 quarterbacks, and far more are closer to Jameis Winston as far as just that style of play. Like I feel like you need a guy. You look at Andrew Luck, look at Eli Manning, look at Ben Roethlisberger. Those guys are willing to take risks. You almost have to take those risks at times, and it's going to lead to some interceptions. It's going to be a little bit costly at times, but at the same time, he's got the anticipation, and you absolutely have to have anticipation. Like if you look at the middle tier guys, what's holding him back is that anticipation. And truthfully, I don't know if that can be developed. That's something that I know Derek's done a lot more work as far as going back and looking at some of like the elite guys, elite prospects over the years. And so he would probably be able to give a little bit better take and perspective on that as far as what can be developed or not. But I just think as far as from what I've seen in the last couple of years, generally guys are somewhat similar in the NFL than they are in college. Development is kind of a term that we all hope more than see. And I think that if that's the case for both of these guys, I'd rather roll with Winston than Mariota. And like I said, that's not to disparage Mariota. It's just I think you look at top end upside and what he can become. And I don't mean that as far as development, but I mean entering the NFL. And if they both stay exactly how they are, I think my franchise would be a little bit better served with Winston than Mariota.
Absolutely. You mentioned Derek's piece or work with Football Savages about going back and looking at some of the quarterbacks in the past. Derek, looking back at that, what are some of the big things that you notice of similarities between the quarterbacks?
In terms of ones that like succeed, I think and this is kind of something Matt Waldman talked about on one of his film rooms that I kind of picked up on, is being able to function both within the constraints of the system and out of the system. And some guys look really, really good outside of the system.
Yeah. Hopefully we just had a quick neck connection.
Looks really good in the system, but then is really bad outside of the system. So I think one thing is definitely being able to function within and without the system. Another thing is definitely kind of like Ian was saying.
And just real quickly, Derek mentioned he would be having some technical issues, but obviously, I think he's back up again.
Okay, wait, where did I leave off?
You said one of the big things about system with the quarterbacks in the past you're seeing.
Oh, was I talking about like functioning within without the
Yeah.
system?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that was something I got from Waldman, and he mentioned Matt Leinart, who I went back and looked at, and that was a perfect example. Like when you look at Leinart, when everything is running smooth, Leinart looked like a first-round guy. Like he looked so talented, and he was accurate. He had a solid arm. He really looked like he could have been legit. But then third and eights come along, and you put a lot of pressure on him. Maybe an interior guy comes up the middle, and he just can't handle himself, and he lost a lot of plays doing that. I know. There was a big play at the end of that Rose Bowl where he held on. There was like 8 seconds left. Held on to the ball way too long, and that killed the game. Like they could have at least had another shot at something. Um, a more recent example of a guy like that, I think it's Aaron Murray. Aaron Murray looked really good when everything in the offense was clicking, but you get one little thing wrong, and Aaron Murray was awful. Like he was god awful. Um, and I think some of the guys thought there was an appeal to him because if you could get the system going, he'd be good. But he just couldn't function outside of it. Another thing is taking risks. There's definitely a line between taking risks and just being reckless. Like Mettenberger was just reckless, and that's why I didn't like him. But guys like Jameis Winston, Andrew Luck, Joe Flacco, a lot of the guys Ian mentioned, they're going to take risks, and sometimes it's not going to pay off. They're going to throw probably a couple more interceptions than you might want. But that's something I'm willing to take. It's something that I think has worked for a lot of top-level quarterbacks. Another thing is definitely not necessarily athleticism, as in being able to bust off 30-yard runs. I don't think you need to do that, but athleticism within the pocket. You even look back. I look back at Peyton Manning at Tennessee. Like he wasn't. He was actually a little better of a straight line athlete than a lot of us think he was. But like within the pocket, his movement was just incredible. Like he could get around anyone, and I kind of see that with Winston too, and that's why I like Winston a lot. He may look kind of like a clunky athlete when he's running 15 yards down the field, but within the pocket, he's really tough to get, and he's really tough to even get a hand on, let alone bring down. I think those are three things that are definitely key, for making NFL prospects work at the quarterback position. I think Winston checks off the box in all three areas.
And we'll definitely have a link to that on the podcast. And I think Seth is joining us now. So before we get asking about his number 3 quarterback in this class, Seth, between Marcus Mariota and Jameis Winston, who would be your number 1 quarterback? And still having issues on that end, so I'll work on them. Ian, who is your number 3 quarterback in this class?
I still have Brett Hundley, number 3. And that's just really how this class is for me. I've got Winston and Mariota, and then it's just like a drop. End of round 3, that's where I've got Hundley. So it's a pretty massive drop from those two until him. Overall, Hundley, I think I will say he's had a rough go of it. Like UCLA didn't do him any favors at all. He mastered the system, didn't have a whole lot of help around him. I've seen some hype around the left tackle that they've had last year, and I went back and looked at him, and he was constantly just a turnstile. Like he was just letting defenders go right through him, right around him. It doesn't even matter. And he was one of 5 linemen that just continuously got abused. So, and even then, his receivers weren't anything to write home about, anyways. So, he's had a tough time, kind of recuperating on that hype that came before the season. But he has his fair share of issues as well. He drops his eyes when he's looking downfield, and he sees a little bit of pressure. Instantly, his eyes go down, and he'll never raise them back up. So, kind of like Derek was talking about, when the play breaks down, what can Hundley do? Well, he's a fantastic scrambler, but I mean that's not necessarily winning football at the NFL level. It's nice to have, but it's not something that you need to have. We see Russell Wilson do something like that, but Russell Wilson also has elite accuracy, fantastic decision making, and those are areas that Hundley doesn't yet grasp. So, with all the issues that UCLA had, plus his own issues, he's had a tough time. Um, but that being said, I still think there's some traits there that you want to develop. Um, but the end of the third round is probably the earliest I would look to take him.
And given those traits of where he has to work and developing, how long would you say it would take him before you would be comfortable starting him if he's able to develop?
I'd want to say at least 2 years. You're looking at a team that has a starter in place, maybe even has a good backup in place. If there's any spot he could do well, I'll name two places. Two places he might be able to do well now. Obviously, Chip Kelly in Philadelphia. That's always going to be the go-to, and that may just be an unrealistic fantasy that I've got as far as realistic expectations of what Chip Kelly can do with a project like that. But we've seen him make two fairly average to maybe bad quarterbacks into very usable pieces, and I don't think Hundley's much worse than those guys overall based off talent. Nick Foles and Mark Sanchez. So that's one spot I think he could probably have success year two. And then Buffalo is another option, and not necessarily because of the coaching staff, although Greg Roman is going to run the ball a lot. More about what's surrounding him. There's just literally so many weapons that if you have a semi-competent quarterback in there, better than Christian Ponder, that might be a team to actually watch. But again, year one, I would not want Brett Hundley on the field year one, that's for sure.
And you mentioned developing, and one thing that has been talked about just with draft, obviously a premium's placed on these quarterbacks. Do you think maybe a situation like Buffalo, Hundley's there at 30th or 30th overall, 32nd overall, they explore trading up for him to secure him for the future?
Yeah, I think that could be in the fold, because you look at Cleveland at 19, you look at Philadelphia right after them, and even teams at the bottom of the first round. I wouldn't be shocked if a team like New Orleans would be interested in him. The dearth of quarterbacks available right now is so severe that Hundley's going to get pushed up. I mean, if he makes it out of the top 50 picks, I'd be really shocked. Same for Bryce Petty, who I'm not a fan of at all. But there's just so much bad quarterback play that these teams are willing to just almost burn a pick and be willing to burn a pick at just a shot at one of these guys developing into something usable.
I wonder if they're still interested in Tom Savage.
I mean, I hear he's available for the top overall pick.
And Derek, what about you? First, your thoughts on Hundley, and then also who, if he is your number 3 quarterback, or if not, who is your number 3?
Hundley's my number 3, but like Ian was kind of saying, like ranking anyone past Winston Mariota is kind of just for like formality. I don't think Hundley's going to be very good. I think he's Jason Campbell at the next level. Like Ian was kind of talking about how he was at UCLA. He mastered the system, but like I hate that system. I've talked about it before. When I used to really like Hundley, and I would bash Nolan's zone a lot. And it's an effective system, for getting production out of middling players. But I think there was a decent amount of talent at UCLA to where that didn't need to be in place, and that Hundley could have. I think if you got him started early, he could have been capable of more. But we never got to saw that, and that's not the path that he was allowed to take. And he was kind of forced into this role where it was like, I think I even heard somewhere like Hundley wasn't allowed to make decisions at the line of scrimmage. He was told, this is the play, you're going to run it, and that's it. And I think that definitely hurts his development. Like I said, I think he's Jason Campbell at the next level. I'm sure he could be a little bit more than that. He's a little bit more athletic, but I don't really see him being better than that as a passer.
Yeah. And you talked about the quarterback grades in this class. I mean, Ian, you mentioned that for you, Hundley is like third-round guy, but he's probably going to be pushed up. Derek, we'll start with you. How many draftable grades did you give to this quarterback class? To the quarterbacks in this class?
I had about 6 or 7 guys that, when I ran them through my system, got a draftable number grade, but there's only 4 that actually consider spending a pick on, and it's obviously Winston Mariota, Hundley, around end of round 3, early 4, and then I think like round 6 or 7, maybe even the 5th round if I'm a really stable team. I think Brandon Bridge is a super exciting guy to just take a gamble on. I don't think he's as bad within the constraints of the system as people think. I think he definitely looks ugly within the constraints of the system, but I think he's very calm in what he does. Uh, and then outside of the system, he just makes some absolutely absurd throws. So I think if he's worth like I said, if you're a team that has some backing, some foundation. I've called for Baltimore. I thought Baltimore, if they took him, would be really cool because we just got rid of Tyrod Taylor. But if some team, wants some athletic backup, I think he's a perfect guy that could develop into something. I've compared him to, like, if you thought about what Cam Newton was like in high school, I feel like that's exactly what Brandon Bridge is right now. And I know that player would definitely be, far away from being a good NFL quarterback. But at the least, he's a very, very good athlete, better than any of these other quarterbacks. And like Justice always says, you got to do something on 3rd down, and he has the arm and athleticism to do it. So that's why I like Bridge.
We talked about Bridge briefly, and one of the scenarios that I would love to see for him, of course, I'm biased, is Green Bay Packers, where he can sit behind Aaron Rodgers for 3 years, which he'll need, work with Mike McCarthy in that system, and develop on his mechanics and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And before yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a good situation for him. And what a lot of these guys, except for the first 2, and even Mariota's kind of a developmental guy. I don't know how many of you guys have read The QB from Bruce Feldman, but there was somewhere in there where it said, it takes 10,000 reps to break these habits. 10,000 reps of, being able to do it in practice, high speed. And I don't think that's a very feasible thing to do. Like, that's so hard to get 10,000 consistent reps where you're pulling off the same thing and breaking something you've been doing for such a long time. So that's why I kind of think Ian was kind of hinting at, like, developing players isn't as easy, or it's a much easier said than done. And I'm a strong believer in the 10,000 rep idea. Like, it takes a lot for guys to change, and I don't think we should assume it's going to happen.
And before we get to Ian, I think we do have Seth now on. Hopefully all technical issues have been worked out. So, Seth, who would be your number 3 quarterback in this class? And we still having audio issues, apparently. All right, so, Ian, let's talk about your draftable grades for this quarterback class. How many did you give out?
I've got 5, and I would draft all 5. Some of the guys that just missed were Blake Sims, Tyler Heineke, Garrett Grayson. Those guys just missed. I had them just outside as UDFAs. And kind of what Derek was talking about was I really value, especially at quarterback, like quarterback more than any other position, if this guy has any chance of being a franchise guy, I would probably take him. Guys like Petty, Sims, Heineke, and Grayson, Carden, those types, Bo Wallace, I mean, all the names out there. I have like zero faith in any of those guys, never developing into anything more than maybe at best a backup. So that would leave me with Winston Mariota, Hundley, and then Chris Bonner out of Colorado State, Pueblo. I like him a lot as like a 5th to 6th round talent. He's got the size, he's got the arm. Obviously, he's still raw. Coming out of a small school, you're always going to deal with that transition from speed, play speed, and even coaching. It's hard to get quality coaching at a school like that, and it's not a slight towards that school, but the jump from that school's coaching to the NFL and what you need as far as consistency and even just as far as like system, it's easy to dominate on FBS levels for these elite talents just based off of athleticism. So you're looking at D2, D3 schools. What are these guys getting away with? I think he gets away with a lot as far as mechanics, his footwork. He needs an overhaul as far as that with his consistency, planting off his front foot instead of falling back and just relying on his arm. But I think the physical tools are there. And same for Brandon Bridge. These are guys that have those wow plays. They've got the plays where you see, oh wow, like if he did that on a consistent basis, this guy could start. And you kind of have to filter through a lot of bad sometimes to get that. But if I'm taking a late round flyer on any guy, it's definitely going to be Chris Bonner or Brandon Bridge. Any of the other guys for me, just either medicals, especially for Bryce Petty, medicals are terrible. Um, Accuracy issues, accuracy is something that's really hard to overcome. Some people argue that for Brandon Bridge, well, he completed like 40-some% or 50% of his passes. Well, if you watch his games, his receivers literally dropped like half of the passes every game. Like he wasn't a great quarterback as far as accuracy, but he put some money throws out there, and they were just some horrific drops at South Alabama. So those are guys late round I would definitely take a flyer on. You sit them for a year or two, and you hope you strike gold, because otherwise you're just kind of drafting for a backup.
Yeah. And real quickly before we move on to the running back position, for young people watching out here, people just getting into the NFL draft, Ian, what advice would you give them on scouting the quarterback position?
I would say even if it's not pretty, sometimes the result is more important than the process of getting the ball there. I think that throwing motions, um, just that whole process. I know a couple years ago that was something that was very highly criticized by everybody. It was all about, does he do X, Y, and Z? Does the ball come up to a certain point? Does he draw? How's his hands and how's all of his movement? It was really weird. Like 3 years ago, like it just seemed like that was all over the place, and I think people have kind of started to get away from that. If the ball gets there accurately, and if the process is correct as far as reading a defense, like more the mental side than the physical side. Obviously, if he has like a Tim Tebow hitch, that's a major issue. But as long as he kind of reaches the baselines as a quarterback physically of his mechanics, then really for me that's enough. I don't really spend too much time looking at arm angles and how the ball comes out of his hand, or I don't know. There's some weird things that some people like to get too in depth about, and I think sometimes you need to just focus on, okay, mentally did he do what he needed to do, and physically is there something there that's going to prevent him from having success? And if as long as there's not a major flaw there, or a major tendency that we saw with like Blake Bortles, he had some major red flags in his delivery. As long as they check the boxes, then I would go eval of what's coming, mentally than necessarily mechanically.
And by the way, ESPN has just reached out. They love that you mentioned Tim Tebow, so they're going to offer you a new
Thank
job.
goodness. Thank goodness, advertisement dollars.
And Derek, what about you? I mean, obviously you're young, but seeing the growth you've made in just a short time is just tremendous. What can young draft minds or people just looking to get into this learn about how to scout quarterbacks?
For a second, I'll kind of co-sign Ian. You know, it's going to look ugly, and that was something I definitely got hung up on when I was younger. I got hung up on guys, like is his arm slot perfect every time? Is his footwork absolutely perfect every time? And I think, like Ian was saying, there's a baseline, and if they hit it, and not much of what they're doing is affecting anything. Like I went back and watched Phillip Rivers, and Phillip Rivers is the ugliest quarterback I've ever seen. Like
Yep.
I was watching him, and I was thinking, like I can't like this guy. Like he's so frustrating to watch. And then, but the ball was getting there, and he was calm in the pocket, and he was making all these great plays. It just looked so ugly. Like it was tough for me to grasp that he was a good player as a college player. And I think he kind of definitely taught me a lesson when I went back and watched him. But another thing is context. Like, I had an example. What was it? But a lot of things like, I know some guys will look at touchdown percentage over interception percentage, and I kind of do that. But at the same time, you still have to watch, because I know there were like 2 or 3 Cam Newton interceptions this year, for example, that were at the very end of a half. Like he was just like throwing balls up. So I think that's something you have to be careful with. And I think like we were sort of mentioning earlier, if a guy okay, let's say it's 3rd and 7, and he goes back and makes a 5-yard throw. If it looks good and it's a great throw, some people are going to think that was a good play, but you have to understand he failed to get the first down. And I think that's huge. And sometimes we just look, well, he made a great throw. It's like, well, at the same time, maybe he restricted Yak, or that was just, that should have been that should have been a route that wasn't supposed to get the first down, and he was kind of just hoping something would happen, that his receiver would make a play. And I think, in those situations, I'd much rather at least just see the quarterback throw down the field past the markers. Even if he misses, he misses, but at least he's trying to get that first down. I think that's huge, kind of like we were talking about earlier with, Flacco and Winston. These guys got to take chances, and these guys that don't just aren't going to be very good quarterbacks. Like, I got to throw in some Alex Smith hate. Like, Alex Smith sucks at football. He's not very good. And anyone that plays like Alex Smith, I just don't think he's going to be a very good quarterback. And I think he's kind of an anomaly because he's actually not terrible. I just don't think he's good. Like, he's not ever going to elevate a team to any capacity. But those are definitely a couple more things for trying to learn the quarterback position.
Awesome. Definitely, the whole calculated risk thing. I mean, you could put it in context for anything. People who take calculated risks are going to go further in life than those who play it safe every step of the way.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
And now, as we transition to running backs, we do have Seth on, and the audio should be working. So, Seth, we'll start with you. Who is your top running back in this class?
My top running back is actually Melvin Gordon. And I don't have Gurley second. So I really liked what Melvin Gordon does. He's kind of he's dynamic, and I feel like you can just give him the ball, and he'll do his thing with it, and he'll get what he can get. And I think some of the more successful backs in the NFL, that's what they do. Jamal Charles, you give him the ball, and you kind of live with the losses because the wins are such big wins. He can make, when he should get a 2-yard loss, he can get a 3-yard gain. Sometimes he should get a 2-yard gain and he ends up with a 3-yard loss. But then there are those plays where it blocks for 2 yards and he gets 25, and that's something as an offensive coordinator I would love to have, as someone who can get something that's not there, and I'm going to live with the losses he gives you.
And by the way, credit Seth for obviously creating our big board draft and for organizing this all today. Seth, thank you.
Thank you guys for bearing with me through my technical issues.
Made it fun. And Derek, what about you? Who is your number one running back in this class?
My top running back is Duke Johnson. In my opinion, it comes down to Johnson, Gurley, and Gordon. And I think they're all very talented. It just kind of comes down to which style of guy you prefer. And I think the thing with Duke Johnson is he's the most efficient runner of the three, and that's what I want out of a running back. And I'm not saying efficiency is huge. And I also think versatility is huge. And I'm not saying Gurley and Gordon can't catch passes out of the backfield. I think Gurley's especially shown he can actually catch passes out of the backfield, be lethal. But I think Duke Johnson, there's even times where I know they've lined him up, I think at receiver, and he makes plays. But Duke Johnson, I think, especially, maybe it's my Ravens bias, but I think, Duke Johnson in the system, like, working with a guy like Tressman, I think Duke Johnson would do so well in a Matt Forte type role. And maybe that's why I like Duke Johnson more. But I think those three, like, the talent level is really, really close. Like I said, it's kind of just what exactly you're looking for out of them.
And so far we have Melvin Gordon, Duke Johnson. Ian, do you have a different top running back for us?
I've got Todd Gurley, but I agree. I mean, those three are really close: Gurley, Johnson, and Gordon. It just kind of depends. It's really weird for me because big draft, and I'm going to steal that term from, I think it was Stoner that's been using that. Big draft media, so like ESPN, NFL Network, and them, they act like Todd Gurley is top 5 next Adrian Peterson talent, and personally, I don't see it. I don't see that type of transcendent talent where you're literally talking about a dude that was like 6'1", 220 pounds, ran a 4.3. He's like one of the freakiest athletes of all time at running back, and he was really damn good at football, and still is. Todd Gurley's not that athlete, and it's okay. Like Dorial Green Beckham's the same discussion with Calvin Johnson. It's okay that he's not that epic of an athlete. He can still be a really good player. But I still see Gurley as like a Steven Jackson type who can still be a really good player. I do have some concerns with his vision, but you look at the entire package, and you kind of almost just assume that he's going to come back healthy. I think that the whole health thing it's a concern, but it can't be over-exaggerated because there were like 7 All-Pros in the last couple years that had torn ACLs. So guys do come back from a torn ACL. The concern is a second torn ACL. Once you get to the second torn ACL, then that's a list that is a lot less promising. Thomas Davis is one of the big guys that has come back from multiple torn ACLs, but he's really one of the few and far in between. But Gurley, for me, he's got the power, just a very natural power to him. Not necessarily with his pad level, but he's just so strong and his balance is excellent. But really, you could make an argument for all 3 of these guys. I mean, like Derek said, as someone that covers a zone blocking team, I wouldn't be shocked to see Duke Johnson go first because his vision and his burst upfield is second to none. With maybe Jay Ajayi in this class, like those 2 guys in a zone blocking scheme are just going to kill everybody. And you just have to talk about like, okay, well, what's the value of taking Gurley mid to late first, as opposed to taking Johnson or Ajayi possibly second round, maybe third round? That cost is definitely a real thing. And one more thing on Gurley, I chuckled because Daniel Jeremiah the other day tweeted he would love to see Jacksonville roll the dice on Todd Gurley with the number 3 overall pick. And I was just like, he couldn't have just pulled that out of thin air. Like, this is a guy that's really well connected. Like, he must have heard something where they're linked either at 3 or 35. And I'm just like, okay, it's going to be really fun to see where he goes because I think he's got so much hype on him right now. If he's anything but Adrian Peterson, he doesn't have to be Trent Richardson. If he's anything else but Adrian Peterson, I feel like he's going to be getting a really bad reputation rather quickly in the NFL.
Well, you mentioned 3rd overall pick. I mean, because people love to make comparisons, they compare every quarterback since Andrew Luck to Andrew Luck. They compare Dorial Green Beckham to Calvin Johnson, and if Gurley goes 3rd overall, naturally we just have to compare him to Trent Richardson. And excuse me about that for a second, but looking at these backs, Ian, you mentioned the value. What is the earliest you'd be willing to take early?
Assuming medicals are good, I wouldn't personally take a first-round running back. That's just my own thing. Maybe a back from this past freshman class and now sophomore class in college football. I think we have a little bit better quality of running backs coming out, and I know that's a big projection in a couple years, but guys like Nick Chubb, that guy looks like a first-rounder to me. When I watch Gurley, I gave him a second-round grade. So in this class where you only have about 12 to 15 true first-round picks, I can understand a team middle to late first round taking a first round, taking Gurley. I wouldn't crucify a team for that. I don't think it's the best resource management, which is ultimately what you want to be very good at in the draft. You really want to be able to nail those picks, but he does have superstar qualities, and he does have that Steven Jackson type upside in my eyes. And that if you're going to invest in any running back, I think that's the type of running back that you're going to want.
And Derek, what about you? With Duke Johnson as your top running back, obviously you have the 3 very close, but where would you take Duke Johnson for a value that you feel comfortable with?
Comfortably, I'd want to take him in the second round, but like Ian was saying, there's not 32 first-round players, and if some team, towards the back end of the first round wants to take a running back first round, I could understand it. Like, I've even talked about, I'm going to keep bringing up Baltimore. I don't want them to take a running back first round, and I don't think signing Forsett back changed too much I expected him back, so I've always been thinking with that mindset anyway. Um, but I've kind of accepted like if they take a first round running back, I won't really be upset. I'll just kind of be whatever. But it's not something I want. Kind of like Ian was saying, I think there's value to be found elsewhere. Is how I see it.
And Seth, for you, obviously Melvin Gordon, your top running back. Where would you feel comfortable with him? And following up on that, I'll leave you with who is the best pass catching back in this class?
Yeah, so Melvin Gordon, I gave a first to second round grade. I'm kind of in the same camp as Ian with, I don't think you should go running back first round. I just feel that the gap between a first round running back and a second round running back and then fifth to sixth round running back isn't as big as some other positions. I think you'll get similar production from either group of player, and so I'd opt to go for the later round picks at running back. But I do have, for Gordon, I have a first to second round pick. And, they've mentioned there aren't 32 first-round players in this draft. I have 24 with first-round grades. After that, I have fringe first-round grades on a bunch of guys, so inevitably some players are going to be picked that don't have, straight first-round grades. So my rankings don't take into account where I think that players will be drafted, but they do take into account what I like to call like the economics of the draft. If a position's weak or if the draft in general is weak, could that pull up the grade of the player? And so that's kind of why Melvin Gordon's a fringe first rounder for me. I would understand it if a team at the back end of the first round took him, but I think he's, if I'm drafting, I don't even really consider taking a running back in the first round. And then for receiving running backs, I'm actually kind of a big fan of Jeremy Langford. I'm more of a fan than I think most people, and one of the reasons is just because I think that you can throw him out there on third down, and I'd feel fairly comfortable with him in pass protection or catching the ball. Mike Davis is kind of the same way, so those are two guys I'd probably talk about as my receiving running backs.
And Derek, from a scouting perspective, what is the number one trait you're looking for in a running back? Derek?
Cut out for a second. Okay, yeah. What did you ask?
From a scouting perspective, what's the number one trait you usually look for in watching a running back?
Physically, I don't know. Physically, I think it definitely varies because there's definitely different types of running backs that can make different things work. So my big thing has always been, I kind of touched on it earlier with Duke Johnson, is efficiency. And that can relate both to vision, like Duke Johnson has very good vision, but he also has this really incredible balance. If he gets hit 3-4 yards behind the line of scrimmage, he has this balance and fight in him to get at least back to the line of scrimmage and always fall forward and always get as many yards as possible. So that's what I really covet in running backs. And it seems like I tend to like the smaller backs, ones that are small and have good burst. Like I remember I loved Andre Ellington, Giovanni Bernard. I really also like Amir Abdullah from this year. It just seems like that's kind of my type of running back.
And Ian, finishing up with you, watching running backs, what's the biggest thing you look for? And then we'll transition into wide receivers with your top wide receiver.
I think it's all a big part of the big puzzle. I think balance is very important. Being able to, I guess twofold with that. Well, let me backtrack. I like balance, but I'll pair that with something. I really like when running backs can create advantageous angles. So this goes more with that short area burst to at least make it so that when a defender hits them, they're not going to be hit straight on. We see this a lot with Duke Johnson. The way he presses defenders in and pulls them kind of into his zone, and then he can just explode by them. If he gets hit, he's getting hit on the side, or he's getting hit just from a partial hit, as opposed to a running back that takes the full contact. So David Cobb would be a good example. As much as I like David Cobb, he takes the full brunt of the contact most of the time. Whereas a guy like Duke Johnson or even Melvin Gordon does a really good job of it. Gordon is strong, but he's not like crazy strong. But he creates really tough angles to actually hit him 100%, and that allows him to just bounce off guys like it's nothing in the open field. And then just the balance, I guess, to execute that move is really important as well. And then, like you said, receivers. My top receiver is Kevin White out of West Virginia.
And what do you like about White?
I think he fits that number one mold, and even though there's a lot of data out there in recent years to kind of talk about, to kind of dispute, like you need a big receiver, and that I still think it's idealistic to have for a quarterback to have a bigger target who wins at the catch point and can make plays out of really poor situations or 50-50 situations. I just think he's got the skills that it takes to become a pretty solid receiver. Like, I would probably put him just below like where Julio Jones is as far as where he can develop. I don't think we're looking at like a future top 5 receiver, anything like that. He's a really good athlete, but he's not a fantastic athlete. He doesn't have a ton of elite traits like a guy like Antonio Brown has a couple of elite traits, and really that's what matters. You have to have elite traits to become an elite player at the position. So I do really like White though, because he's just a ball dominant player. Like he'll go up and grab the ball, and he's got that my ball attitude, and he doesn't really play to that 4.35 speed, but I think his speed was underrated kind of through the process until that he ran that great 40 time.
And if you were the Oakland Raiders at the 4th overall pick, let's say Leonard Williams is off the board, is it an easy decision for you to take Kevin White?
It is an easy decision for me to not take Kevin White. And as I say that, I'm pretty sure. Let me sort my thing here. Yeah, I've got him as a top 10 talent this year, but just positional value wise, it's so hard to pass up a really good edge rusher. And if Vic Beasley's there, or Vic Beasley's like my baby in this draft. So, but if Vic Beasley's there, maybe if another top edge rusher, it's kind of a stretch to put anyone else maybe in that top 5. Maybe Dante Fowler. I really like the thought of taking a first-round edge rusher and then coming back and taking a second-round receiver, just because as good as White is, there's just not a big enough difference for me between the first and second-round receivers than there is the first-round edge rushers and the second-round edge rushers.
Well, definitely. I think another thing about this, when you look at the most valuable or key positions on team, you got quarterback, you got left tackle, but then when you flip to the defense, you want to have a top edge rusher to get after the quarterback, and wide receiver is much further down on that list.
Yep, exactly.
And Derek, what about you? Who is your top wide receiver in this class?
If we're talking about my preference, I'd say Amari Cooper. But I think both Cooper and White have equal chance to be better than each other. I think it kind of depends on the quarterback that they land with. If Kevin White lands with someone like, let's say, Ben Roethlisberger, or a Joe Flacco, or even an Eli, like a guy that's just gonna throw at him no matter what, I think he's gonna succeed there. And Cooper is gonna, I think, do a lot better with a guy who is a lot more methodical, a lot more economic in how he plays. I think, a guy that was like that, example-wise, is like Emmanuel Sanders. Like, Emmanuel Sanders in Pittsburgh was kind of getting underused because I don't think he fit Ben Roethlisberger all that well. But, you get him with a guy like Peyton Manning, who, right when the play is open, he's hitting it. I think that's perfect for, a guy like Sanders, or, a guy like Cooper, who has really clean cuts, gets into space. And when he makes his move, he's going to be open as soon as he makes it. And I think a quarterback that can realize that and can hit him when he does that is going to be perfect for him. I really like both of them. I could definitely see either of them being better than each other, and both are going to be very good.
And would you take either of them or both in the top 10?
I don't think so. Kind of like what Ian was saying with positional value. It's tough for me to take a guy that high. I don't even think either of them were better than Sammy Watkins last year, and Sammy Watkins was my number one uh, prospect. And like even if you're using hindsight, I think that like I don't even know if I don't know. I do feel like I overvalued Sammy Watkins a little bit. Um, but it's really is so hard to take a receiver, top 10. And kind of like Ian was saying, I'd rather take someone else top 10 and then get a receiver later on.
And Seth, to you, who is your number one wide receiver? And then follow you up with combining the 2014-2015 class, who would be your top 5 wide receivers?
I have Amari Cooper just ahead of Kevin White. I have him ranked 8 and 9, respectively. And it's really, I think, what you're looking for, what your team needs. Some teams like, I think Oakland would opt to go for Kevin White more. I know Reggie McKenzie really likes bigger receivers, and Derek Carr likes to throw a lot of fades and stuff like that, and I think that Kevin White fits that, more than Amari Cooper would. But Amari Cooper, I think, is as receivers go, I think he's just a better receiver, barely. He's smooth and he catches the ball naturally, and he's quick, and he's just a receiver. I mean, if he was bigger and faster, he'd be a slam dunk, but he's not. You kind of have to take that into account. So I mean, I have him right there. And then if I were to combine my top 5 from this year and last year, I had Mike Evans just above Sammy Watkins. So my top 5 would go Mike Evans, Sammy Watkins, Odell Beckham, Amari Cooper, and then probably Allen Robinson at 5.
And Derek, what about you?
Composite between the two classes. If you don't take hindsight into account, I would say Sammy Watkins, Odell Beckham, Amari Cooper, Kevin White, and then that 5th spot. That's a tough. I can't really say Mike Evans because I didn't like Mike Evans coming out of the prospect, and I'll admit I completely whiffed on him. I definitely overthought him. I don't know. That's a tough one. I honestly might say Devontae Parker, and I know it sounded a lot like I don't really like him. I just thought he was getting really, really. Excuse me. I thought he was getting. Move on for a second.
And I'm just going to say this: if Derek dies on the podcast, so it'll make for great video.
I think I'm okay. But yeah, I was saying Devontae Parker. I know it sounded like I don't like him. I think he's good. He was just definitely getting really, really overhyped. Like, the top 10 stuff for him was just absurd, and maybe that's why it looked like I didn't like him. But he'd probably round out my top 5.
And Ian, what about you?
I would have Sammy Watkins, then Odell Beckham, then Mike Evans, then Kevin White, and then Devontae Adams. I was really high on Devontae. I still feel pretty good about that. I mean, Sammy had a really tough situation in Buffalo last year, and Evans completely killed it. And obviously Odell Beckham. I mean, Odell Beckham just took everybody by surprise. Like, you could have had Odell Beckham as the number 1 overall prospect last year and still been too low on him. Like, what he accomplished last year was just absolutely insane. So it'll be really fun to see if he can continue tearing it up like that. And it's really good to see someone like that kind of, even though everyone liked him, we were all still kind of low on him. So that was really cool. But I still feel pretty good about those ranks from last year. And as good as this receiving class is, I'm just not sure if there's a receiver worth like there were last year, where there was 3 really great receivers. I'm not sure I see a guy that would crack that top 3 this year.
And given what OBJ has done, he may reach a level where every wide receiver prospect is compared to him, just like Andrew Luck with the quarterbacks.
Yeah, definitely.
Looking at the best skill we'll start going with you, Ian, for best hands. Derek, for who runs the best, cleanest routes, and then Seth, you can cover the best deep threat. And we'll start with Ian.
This all from 2015 class?
Yes, all from 2015.
Okay. Best hands. Let's see. Just looking through my list. I would probably have to go with. God, most of this class has actually had major problems with drops. Maybe Nelson Aguilar. That's a guy I really like in round 2. Or Justin Hardy. Justin Hardy out of East Carolina. He has awesome hands. Cleanest routes for me. That has to be Cooper. In my opinion, I don't even think that's close. He's a fantastic route runner. He's going to walk in day one and be one of the best route runners in the NFL. And then contested catches, I'd probably put Kevin White, Brashad Perriman, and I'd probably put Dorial Green, back him up there too. Like when he wants to play well and when he's on, he's just unbelievably good.
And Derek, following up with you.
For hands, I mean, I think like this might be a shocker answer, and he got hurt like halfway through the year. I don't know if he has the best hands, but like DeAndre Smelter, the way he could catch things out of his body and just naturally get his hand to the ball really quickly, and I'm pretty sure he had really big hands. I feel like, maybe right now he's not exactly the best catcher, but he was already so natural with it for how young he was at football. So I think he might have the best hands in the class. And then route running, like Ian said, I think it's pretty easily Cooper. He's quick. He sets him up very well. He's going to step in, day one and easily be able to get open. And then contested catches, I haven't seen much of Dorial Green Beckham. So I'd probably hand it over to Kevin White, maybe Jalen Strong. And I think Devin Smith isn't great at necessarily going up and just beating dudes physically, but Devin Smith is really, really good at positioning himself and tracking the ball and making sure his body's in perfect spot to catch it. So I mean that's kind of contested catching, but not really. So for pure contested catching, I think it's White or Strong.
And Seth?
Yeah, for hands, I'd probably have to echo Justin Hardy. I really, really like him. He kind of gets knocked for being small, but he's really not that small. I don't really know where that comes from, but he seems to catch everything and then just do incredible stuff after the catch with it. And if Oakland took him in the second round, I'd be hyped for that. For route running, Amari Cooper easily, I think. He's just so smooth and crisp. Although I would have to say DeAndre Smelter is a very smooth runner. Although his routes aren't the sharpest. He's pretty new to the game, and he's super smooth. Contested catches, I'll have to go with Kevin White again. He can just go up there and get the ball. And then for deep threat, Devin Smith for me is awesome. I fell in love with Devin Smith as soon as I started watching him. I've said it a couple of times, but I remember watching one play in particular where it's cover one and you see the safety at the snap just look over to Devin Smith's side and immediately bail to his spot because he knows Devin Smith's running a 9, and Devin Smith still blows the top off of the zone and scores a touchdown. And it's kind of like he doesn't have, he didn't at the combine, he didn't run a 4.3, but in a game, a safety can know exactly that, he's going to run a 9 route and he'll still burn him. So I really like Devin Smith.
And one of the things I think we've seen over the years is draft gains more popularity, more players become more notable. We've seen it with quarterbacks. Immediate success early leads fans to believing that all these quarterbacks are going to have immediate success. And then after last year, when the wide receivers just Beckham Jr., Mike Evans, just incredible. Where should fans put their expectations for this year's rookie wide receiver class production-wise? And we'll start with Derek.
Um, like you just can't compare him to last year's class. Like last year's class literally broke records, if I remember correctly, like in yards, in touchdowns, like a number of base statistics. So you definitely can't hold them up to that pedestal of last year's class. I think you should still expect some decent rookie production, but last year's class really was special, and you can't expect that to really happen like ever again.
And Ian just basically agree.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. I mean, you'll expect some of these mid-rounders to probably play pretty well, whether it be as a rookie or down the line, like DeAndre Smelter, kind of like you talked about, Trey McBride, guys like that. Maybe even Chris Conley out of Georgia. You want to see those guys contribute within their first 2 years, depending on Smelter's health. McBride should be able to kind of come in pretty quickly and play for a team. But outside of a couple mid-rounders, I mean, Derek's right. It's so hard, and it's not really fair or realistic to kind of expect these guys to meet what happened last year. And if they do, great, but it's not realistic necessarily.
Absolutely. And as we flip over to the defensive side of the ball, talking about, Winchman earlier, edge rusher, probably one of the most key pieces of a defense. Seth, who are your top 5 edge rushers in this class?
Let me pull up my rankings. So, first off, I'll start with Vic Beasley. I've loved Vic Beasley since last year. I said if I was Oakland at 5 before we knew if Vic Beasley was coming out, I was like, I would take Vic Beasley at 5 in a heartbeat. Second, Dante Fowler, like him a lot. 3, I still have Randy Gregory there. He just, after kind of a disappointing combine, he still has some nice stuff on film. 4, I have Magbe Odighizuwa. I think I like him a lot more than most people. He's my 11th ranked player, but he does so many things really well. And then Eli Harold is kind of a freak, and he's number 5. He puts together a lot of great attributes, and so yeah, those are my top 5.
All right, and Ian, what about you?
I've got Vic Beasley, by far number 1. I'm still high on Randy Gregory. The combine thing was kind of overblown. If you look at his numbers, he was still above average, at least in most categories. I think he wasn't the freakiest of freaks, but he was still pretty good athletically. Then I have Dante Fowler, Bud Dupree. Although I kind of put Dupree as more of like an outside linebacker. Ideally, I don't think I would have him as like an edge rusher because he has no idea what to do with his hands. So I'll put him more at linebacker for the sake of this. So I would say Beasley, Gregory, Fowler, and then Diggy, Odighizuwa. I would have him number 4, and then Eli Harold out of Virginia. And I've got 3 of those guys with first-round grades, and then Diggy's right on the fringe.
Where's Mike going?
And Derek, who are your top 5 edge rushers?
I've only actually seen 6, but right now I have Vic Beasley number 1. I still do like Randy Gregory too, like the whole combine thing. It is kind of scary that what Justice was saying with force players, like nobody's ever really succeeded at his weight, and to have not been a super athlete at his weight was a little bit concerning, and I kind of get that, but
Audio issue on that part. We'll get it fixed up.
there's a little bit more.
There we go.
And then what?
Oh no, just real quickly, you cut out, I think, after your 3rd prospect.
Oh no, I only had right now I only have Vic Gregory, and then the 3rd spot I think would come down to Fowler and Dupree, but I'll give the edge to Fowler. I think he's a cleaner prospect. He's stouter in run defense. I don't think he's as clean as people are thinking he is, though. Like his 2013 technical ability was absolutely horrible, and he still kind of had some issues with it this year. But but I think he's a solid athlete, and he's a smart player, and he's really versatile. So I'll give him the nod at 3. 4 is Bud Dupree. I wrote about him pretty recently. I think there's definitely some scary things with him. He's not that technically sound. He kind of plays like a child, like he's super unaware. But his athletic ability is like it shouldn't like he shouldn't have done what he did at his weight. So I still have a lot of faith in him there. And then my 5th spot would have to come down to Kikaha and Ray because those are the only other 2 I've seen. Quite frankly, I don't think I like Ray all that much, and I know Kikaha isn't a super athlete either, and he kind of has medical. So actually, now that I think about it, the medical might push Kikaha down a little bit, even though I think he might be the better player. So I'll give Ray the nod at 5, even though I don't think he's very good. He's not a first round player.
And we mentioned a lot of names. I mean, one that Ian mentioned was Eli Harold. And Ian, why don't you talk about him more and what you like about him?
He's a very toolsy player, and his pure speed around the edge is legit. That guy can really get off the snap and get around the tackle. He flashes very strong hands. It's just he's very inconsistent with it. He'll go long stretches of the game where he won't be able to land his punches very well, and ideally you want to get them inside the chest. And once you can establish that and get those hands inside the chest, he's got the natural power, even though he needs to add more weight. It's just a very natural strength, and it's kind of similar to what Aldon Smith had coming out of college. He was very naturally strong, even though he was underweight. And once he added on the extra weight, within like a year or 2, he was just a monster. And I'm not sure if Harold's necessarily as freaky as he was, but he still has a similar skill set and a similar game. So I think I've got him as a second rounder right now, but if I'm sitting there at the end of the first round, and if I have a pretty competent weight training program, which most of these teams should, I'm definitely picking him as like a third down rusher year 1, and then hopefully year 2 he'll be a little bit more bulked up and ready for a full-time role.
And Seth, you mentioned how high you are on I'm just gonna say Ziggy or Diggy or whatever. I'm not gonna pronounce. What do you love about him?
Well, he's pretty big, 270, and he shows great burst for his size. I love to see him just get off and take control of tackles, and he can basically do whatever he wants with them any way he wants. He can fly by him, he can beat him with power, he can beat him back inside, set him up inside out. I like his hands. And, he might have some stiffness in his hips, and a lot of people are concerned about that. I'm not as much, just because of all of the other ways he can beat you. And at his size, I think and his athleticism, I think he can really play multiple positions. I really think he's honestly athletic enough that if you wanted him to play outside linebacker in a 3-4 or like Sam in a 4-3 under, something like that, I think he could do it. I think he could also play a 5 technique if you wanted him to, because he's strong enough. And, if you're a 4-3 team, I think that you could line him up at like a strong defensive end, and then on passing downs move him into a 3 technique. And I think he could excel at all of those positions, and he kind of gives defensive coordinators like a piece that they can just throw anywhere, and I think he could succeed at all of those spots.
And Derek, you mentioned your piece on Bud Dupree. You mentioned how on the field, his awareness sometimes like he's very young. What other things jumped out to you about Bud Dupree? And we'll have a link to obviously the article in the description.
Definitely his awareness was a big thing. There were a lot of times where, and I did hear that he just kind of did whatever the coaching staff told him to do, which can also kind of be a problem because if he's not able to freelance and just understand that some plays are going to be different, that might be an issue. But there were definitely like running plays where he would just slice inside, and it looked like he should have definitely tried to hold his ground instead. And then there's sometimes in the run game where he's late to throw a guy off and try to make a play. Another thing I noticed, like he doesn't know what he's doing when he's initiating contact, and that's a huge thing. Like you see it in the run game. He'll sprint up to dudes, and then right before contact, he'll kind of sit there, slow up, won't really hit guys. He'll kind of just put his hands out there. If that, there's a lot of times where he turns his shoulder. So I think if you can kind of get Bud Dupree to understand that there's, this first contact, you can win or lose snaps so easily with that first contact. Like I remember so many pass rushing snaps where he just destroys the tackle off the edge, and you go, if he can just hit this guy in the chest and then get under him and dip around, he should have the sack, and he doesn't do it. And that's kind of infuriating. But I think his athleticism, both at the combine and even on tape, it's just so eye-opening. I can't see how he won't be a good player to some extent.
And one player that attracted some attention today, and not in a good way, was Shane Ray, who at the Pro Day ran a 7.7 three-cone time, which is just at his size very bad. So, Ian, we'll start with you. What was your reaction to seeing that number, and where do you have him?
It wasn't surprising for me to see that. I've definitely been low on him for a while now, and I wasn't really impressed with too much on his tape. He's a guy that almost all of his production comes when Missouri's already well ahead. It may be in like that second half, especially you'll see him just pin his ears back and jump snaps, and that's all he really relies on. I mean, once he jumps the snap, yeah, he's really hard to stop. Well, I mean, you could say that about most pass rushers, though, especially at the NFL level. If they're going to jump the snap, then, I mean, it goes both ways. Tackles in the NFL are more equipped to recover from that and be able to beat you, and two, they see that a lot more. So it's just not really that special. It's not really even a trait. It's just more of like a skill to jump a snap, but it's not like a valuable trait or anything. So I think he's more of like a third down rusher type. I've got him as a low third-round pick right now as a situational player. I don't think he's really a good athlete, and you have to be at least a pretty good athlete to be a good edge rusher. At least naturally strong. Like there has to be some sort of trait there that makes you stand out, and he doesn't really have anything besides jumping snaps. So the top 10 talk to me is really just way too rich for my blood.
All right, and my good friend Seth, we'll flip to you. When you saw that, what jumped out to you about Ray, and where do you have him?
I have him. He's my 7th edge rusher, and he's my 27th overall player. I guess I'm just, I really like the edge class this year, I guess. But he's quick, I guess, off the line of scrimmage, and sometimes it's tough to tell if it's snap anticipation or if it's quickness, but the more you watch, I mean, I think it's snap anticipation more than anything. And he does have some good skills, but you almost fall into the thing of like, is it just good enough to beat college tackles and he'll get stonewalled by NFL tackles? And if that's the case, he can't really beat you any other way other than getting quick off the line of scrimmage into the backfield. So if he gets that taken away from him at the next level, then although I have a first to second round grade on him, it could make a team at the top of the second round or the end of the first round look really bad for taking him. So I mean, it's kind of risk reward, but that's where I have him.
And we flip to the cornerback class, and we're going to start with Derek and the cornerback he was watching last night, Marcus Peters. And before we get to his thoughts, I will flip to a play that he sent me to show of one thing about Marcus Peters. And we'll flip to that now. Ooh, give me a second there. Let me set that up.
See, that's a play I really, really like from Peters because he's not playing all too close to this receiver, and he's looking at the quarterback, and as soon as he sees the quarterback, like that's his guy, Peters has no hesitation. He just jumps right at him. And he's definitely a very good enough athlete to get there and make the play work. So I thought that was a really good play from Peters. And then there was another one that I didn't give you, but I tweeted it out, I think, the first night I was watching him. It was in his 2013 Stanford game, and he's playing cover 3, and it looks like Hogan throws like a deep crosser, and Peters just comes flying off the screen and jumps in for the interception. And that play, his understanding of knowing where the quarterback is going to go with the ball and his ability to just see it, click and close, both mentally and athletically, is just incredible. I think Peters is a very special player on the field, and like with his off-field stuff, I'm honestly not all too concerned about it because um, I don't think he broke any laws or anything. Um, he just had that scuffle with his coaches, and I know that coaching staff didn't like a lot of the old regime players. Um, so I'm not necessarily giving Peters a pass. Um, I think it's definitely kind of a little bit of a yellow flag, but I don't really think it changes where I draft him, considering just how talented he is.
And just based solely off talent, is he your number one corner as of right now?
Pretty easily, and like that's not even a slight to any of the other guys. Like he's just so good.
And Ian, you did phenomenal Bleacher Report about Marcus Peters, which we'll have linked up. What did you like about Marcus Peters when watching him?
It's just watching him was it was really a treat, and that's probably my favorite article I've ever written, just because not only was it fun to just kind of evaluate him from the charting aspect, but just watching him play it's just a real treat because he's so aggressive, but he's so under control, and he's so emotional about the game, and I think that's where the maturity stuff came into. Is you could see him, my favorite play that he has, and it's just a couple of my favorite plays. One of them is when he's facing Jalen Strong. He claps in his face, and he wants Jalen to actually come at him, and he wants the target to come toward him, and he ends up giving up a touchdown on the next play. So it's one of those things where he lost on the play, but you love the competitiveness. And there's another play that I remember where the guy just wants to compete, and I forget who it was against. It might have been against Eastern Washington in 2014, where this receiver was just jawing off to him constantly, and of course Peters likes to talk, and the guy finally catches a ball on Peters, and he goes up and he taps him on the head hey, all right, let's do this, let's get this going. And it's just seeing his type of aggression, and the guy clearly loves the play. I don't think anyone should ever question whether he wants to play or not. The question is for him, is he bored? Because I think at times he got bored, that he was just so dominant. Offenses would almost always just go away from him. He was very rarely targeted, and when he was targeted, his ability to break back towards the ball and just instinctively know where the ball is at all times, it's a very rare player. Going back and watching a couple of the past few elite cornerbacks, very reminiscent of Darrelle Revis, that type of player that he just knows where the ball is at all times. And you'll see him even in that highlight that you showed, the way he worked back towards the ball just there's no second thoughts. It's just, boom, okay, I see that this is going to happen. And he very rarely gets burned on that because he's good enough athletically and just smart enough. And he's talked about that in his interviews as well, that studying receivers, studying tendencies of the quarterback, putting in the work off the field is something that he really prides himself on. For me, he's my number 2 overall player in the class. I don't see a situation where he's not going to be a great player in the NFL.
I mean, I do share that Peters love. I mean, I'm a little bit weird. One thing I did love about him, I mean, you'll see some star players, if they're on special teams, they don't really give a crap. They're just going to stand there, mail it in. But Peters, I think it was versus Stanford, huge gap between him and the returner. He busted his ass downfield and prevented a return for a touchdown. Just to see that from a player of that caliber, I just loved it.
Yeah, his time on Montgomery, 2013, that's when he did it.
Yeah. And then one more thing about Pierce. You mentioned he can get bored at times. It just reminds me a little bit, not saying he's Richard Sherman, but when Green Bay didn't target Richard Sherman at all, Sherman got bored. I mean, you could see him getting a little bit tired back there. So I think with that same persona that he loves the game, I think that's basically Marcus Peters.
Yeah, and you have to think too. I mean, the Pac-12 defenses play so many snaps. He's far from the only Pac-12 receiver that you could, or any cornerback across the country. But he had some bouts with that where he was just okay, all right. I think the Hawaii game was definitely one of the worst that I saw of him do that, where he was just this is a joke. And he was just I just don't even care. And it got him beat a couple times on it. But yeah, he's really interesting prospect to sit there and watch. It's just because his attitude toward the game is really fun.
Yeah. And obviously, there's been some talk about the off-field stuff and how it will affect his draft stock. Seth, we'll start with you. How much you think that will affect his draft stock and where he goes on draft day?
I think it kind of will, but I don't think it should. He's my fourth overall prospect, and if the Raiders took him at 4, I'd be ecstatic. I mean, I think that he's, it's tough with hindsight to really do it, but without knowing what they were going to become, if you showed me Darrelle Revis Pitt tape and Marcus Peters Washington tape, I think I'd take Marcus Peters, and I think Marcus Peters is the best corner I've seen, the best corner prospect I've ever watched. I haven't been doing this forever, but he just has everything. He has a great combination of skills, of recovery speed and footwork, and he loves the game and ball skills and everything. He's completely well-rounded, and he's just a great player. And but at the same time, with all of the stuff that the league is going through with public marketing and public opinion and everything, I think that some teams might drop him on their boards just because you get dismissed from a team and it's kind of a big deal. But I think that he should be a top 5 pick, but I could see him dropping to the middle of the first round.
And what about you from stuff you're hearing? Obviously, you've got connections to the NFL. Where do you think he winds up going?
I wouldn't be surprised to still see him top 10, maybe top 15 at worst. Looking at, like the Miami, San Francisco, Houston range at worst. From what people have said, is the combine was really good for him. He really did a good job getting out in front of his issues and his past and owning up to them. And so ultimately, I think that's going to really count for something. The question is, does a team want to pull the trigger top 5 or 10? I would be comfortable with that. Obviously, I don't have all of the information on hand, but for me personally, I don't see why a team wouldn't take him top 5. I think we're going to get to next year, and I think one of the things that people are going to be talking about is, why wasn't this guy taken higher if he ends up falling into the teams?
So what you're telling me is I should cancel my pre-order of my Marcus Peters Green Bay jersey?
Yeah, that would be pretty shocking. Unless if they trade up for him, I'm not sure I see that one.
That's unfortunate. But no, I do love hearing that. He should go. I mean, top 10, top 15. That is really where he should go. Looking at by position, or by skill, we'll go one for each of you. Best instincts, best ball skills, and then best footwork. Derek, we'll start with you. Which of these cornerbacks do you think has the best instincts?
I think it's Peters. Like Ian was even kind of saying, the way he definitely seems like a smart player, and I think that plays into it. Ian was talking about how he does everything off field, and that totally makes sense. Because Peters, he doesn't doubt anything that he's doing. Like, he sees things and he just jumps at it. And I think that's such a valuable skill to have. He just always, he knows where the ball is and where it's going to go, both before the ball's thrown and when it's in the air. Like, he's just so good at finding the ball and making a play on it. So I think he has the best instincts in the class.
And Seth, who do you think has the best ball skills in this class?
I'd have to say Marcus Peters. Just the way he plays the ball, he sees receivers and what they're doing, and he just attacks it and he goes and gets it. It could be just me being infatuated with him, but I think he has the best ball skills in the class.
Well, to be fair, I think we're all infatuated with Marcus Peters. And Ian, with you, who do you think has the best footwork among the cornerbacks in this class?
I'll go outside of Peters, just so it's not unanimously Marcus Peters. I really like Kevin Johnson out of Wake Forest, and I also like Steven Nelson out of Oregon State. I think both of those guys do a great job with their feet. They're both a little bit smaller as far as their mass. Johnson is still a little bit light, even weighing at like 188 or whatever he weighed in at the combine. Nelson's a smaller cornerback, off-ball type. And those two kind of have to rely on their athleticism, their footwork, and their technique more so than their physical, just in terms of like bulk and actually like overpowering players. I think those two guys are really nice second round options. Maybe fringe first, especially Johnson. I think Johnson's deserving of that first round talk, considering the depth of the class. But and then I wouldn't keep out Nelson either for a team that wants to do a little bit of off ball coverage.
And Kevin Johnson, you mentioned. I know Derek, you've been tweeting about him a lot, and you also wrote about him for Football Savages, which will include the link. What were your thoughts on Kevin Johnson? And I know you had him as a first-round player.
Yeah, I think Kevin Johnson's a first-round player. I've only seen 4, 5, 6.
Technical issues. All right, we'll get that taken care of. Seth, just real quickly for you, who do you think is the most underappreciated cornerback in your opinion in this class?
Underappreciated. That's tough. I mean, I've heard like Mike Mayock say that Trey Waynes is like far and above the best cornerback in this class, and it's some like big draft that we've talked about is kind of doing the same thing. But like Marcus Peters is the best corner in the class, and so like talk of him not being the number one corner, I think, kind of makes him underappreciated. But just to go off of him a little bit, I think that P.J. Williams has some really nice skills, and I don't know about everyone else, but I have a fringe first round grade on P.J. Williams. I really like what he does and the way he played, and he kind of stepped up in big moments, especially like the national championship game a couple of years ago. He played lights out, and so I'll probably go with P.J. Williams.
I was taken aback by the whole Mike Mayock saying Trey Waynes is number one cornerback. That I'll pass that on to Derek.
I was watching Wayne's yesterday. Like he definitely has the size you're looking for. He actually weighed in a little less than I thought he would. But and he has recovery speed, and I think that is really flashy to people, and I think that's part of why people really love Justin Gilbert. And I actually think Justin Gilbert was a better prospect than Waynes is. Waynes, he has that recovery speed. He kind of looks good in open space, but his change of direction and his hips are so bad, in my opinion. Like there's one play versus it wasn't even a very good school. I can't remember the game right now. But he's playing cover 3, and they throw, a deep route in his area, and he's right on this guy, and he has his chest turned to the field, and the throw ends up towards the sidelines, and he tries to turn around and get going to the ball, but he's so slow in all of those movements, and then once he gets himself turned around, he can't really make a burst, and he can't really get there to the ball. Like, he accelerated so slow, and that's definitely going to, get Waynes in trouble at the pro level, is that he's really not going to be able to keep up with these guys that are moving laterally, and you can already see it in his college tape. I think, if he ends up playing against, guys that, if you can isolate him and give him help inside, and then just kind of make him a deep player, which is really hard to ask from just a cornerback. He could kind of be good, but he's so flawed in so many areas outside of his deep speed that I just can't see him being that good of an NFL cornerback.
I mean, Ian, I think you mentioned some underappreciated cornerbacks you like in this class. Who are some cornerbacks you think are getting too much love or a little bit overrated?
I would agree on Waynes. I saw him like as a top 6 pick, I think, in someone's mock. One of the experts' mock. I think it might have been Daniel Jeremiah. Top six talk is crazy. I mean, like Derek talked about, when I was on the Draft Savages podcast, I made the direct comparison of Trey Waynes to Justin Gilbert. Like, they're making the exact same mistake as they made last year, and Waynes is probably a little bit lesser of an athlete than Gilbert. Like, the straight line speed doesn't matter that much. Like, you should be able to win before you have to use that straight line speed. You don't want to be a 4.6 cornerback. 4.6 cornerback or slower is a concern. But if you're within like that 4.4 to high 4.5s, that's okay. We've seen a lot of guys have great success with that play speed, not necessarily short and track speed, like play speed. You need to be at least less than a 4.6, and that's really just checking a box. So I think Waynes is a little bit overvalued there. And then the guy that's been getting a lot of hype recently is Ronald Darby out of Florida State. And he has some good tape, but he has some really bad tape as well. Like, he's a good athlete, and he can cover guys and mirror guys downfield. He has a smooth back pedal, but there's a lot of times where he'll just flip his hips open or he'll close them off to the sidelines, and as soon as he does that, NFL quarterbacks are going to just rip him to shreds. There's one highlight against Dorsett, Philip Dorsett from Miami, where he does a simple post route on Darby, and Darby closes his hips off to the sideline as if he's going to run a 9 route, and as soon as he starts to break towards the sideline, all of Dorsett has to do is just cut inside, and it's an easy touchdown. And that's going to happen weekly in the NFL unless if he can stay more balanced and stay a little bit more disciplined in his back pedal. And I don't really see ball skills with him either. He has really, really bad hands, and just the ability to even locate the ball is something that was inconsistent on his tape. I really can't stress how valuable it is for a cornerback to look back for the ball, because once you look back for the ball, you can be physical. It doesn't really matter how physical you want to be, because as long as you're playing the ball, there's usually not going to be a pass interference call. You have to locate the ball quickly and then get into positioning so that you can play the ball. And instead, he doesn't look up for the ball. He'll just kind of play the hands of the receiver, or he'll be stuck in off coverage, and his athleticism is kind of wasted in off coverage. But sometimes you have to play off coverage if you're not good enough at keeping your hips squared and following a guy downfield. So this top 15 talk about him, for me, it's really setting him up for failure. If he's going to go top 15, I mean, he's definitely a bust candidate already. It doesn't really, I mean, you have to have those ball skills. Like, it's imperative that you stay disciplined throughout the route.
And you mentioned getting burnt, which leads us to hot take segment. We want the hottest takes possible. So, Ian, what is your draft hot takes?
My draft hot take. I would say, well, I guess it'd probably have to be Shane Ray. My Shane Ray is my 13th ranked edge rusher. I've got guys like Anthony Chiquillo over him for Miami. Let's see some of the other names I've got over him. As my thing stopped loading. Even a guy like Tony Washington out of Oregon, Daniil Hunter out of LSU. Like, I just don't see anything with Ray outside of like a third down rusher. And then also his fellow SEC mate, I would have to go with is Landon Collins. Landon Collins for me is an early third round talent. You're talking about an in the box safety with less than great size, has some shoulder injury history issues. And in coverage he's okay. You're going to have to keep him in split 2 coverage, though, where he's playing in cover 2 shell. Anything more than that, he can play a little bit of man, but he's just not really a dynamic safety, and so he's gonna probably go round 1, and that's another pick that I'm going to look at, and you're really going to worry about your return on investment there.
And Derek, I mean, obviously in California we're in a terrible drought, so this hot take of yours is never going to go out. It's going to stay here permanently. So what is your hot take for us?
Well, my first one, I'll co-sign the Landon Collins take. Like, he's a third-round player. He's going to get taken in the first round, and he's going to be an average safety at best. You kind of have to scheme around him. Like, he's good at what he does, but like if you put that in a normal scheme per se, he's going to underperform a lot from that first round hype. My other one is he's not as popular as a player now as he was maybe a month ago, but people were really hyping TJ Clemmings to be like a first round player, and I thought he kind of just wasn't good. Like, he was super physical, and whenever he could land his punch, it was really nasty, but his hand placement was pretty bad for the most part. I didn't like the way he moved. He wasn't that fast off the snap. There were a lot of instances where he, his balance was off, and he let a guy pretty easily just knock him over. I just had a lot of issues, that theoretically he could fix, that I just don't think he will all that easily.
And Seth, to round it out, what is your hot take for us?
One of my hot takes, I guess, would have to be Odighizuwa. I have him as my 11th best player, and I think that's higher than most people have him. And I see him coming into the league and instantly being a force. I think he's going to be really good. And then a couple of other ones, maybe just one other one, I guess I would say would be if, after Brandon Sheriff, I see Ari Kwanjo possibly being the second best guard in this class. I know a lot of people hate him and they don't like him at all, but I totally love those linemen that are huge and can just take control of a linebacker or even a lineman, a defensive tackle, and just control him and move him out of the way and be a total road grader. And so I loved Greg Robinson, I love T.J. Clemmings, and I'm a huge Ari Kwanjo fan, so that would probably be my hot take.
I love it. And obviously, thank you everyone for doing this. I mean, Seth, thank bigboarddraft.com. Guys, if people watching this aren't checking out that site, you need to. Great group of writers. And again, thank you, Seth, for creating it, bringing the group together, and for setting this podcast up. And also, the number one takeaway from here today, you have to pre-order Ian's NFL Draft Guide. You have to. It's a must. I added it to the Constitution today. So every American has to do it now. So be sure to do that. Obviously, also Derek, just his work at Football Savages with quarterbacks, with draft prospects in general, just must follow, must check out. And Ian, we'll start with you. Where can people follow you and see all the work you do?
Hit me up at NFL Film Study on Twitter. You can find me on Bleacher Report. You can find me on Big Draft Board. Just come on and talk football. That's what I'm here to do.
Or basketball, just.
Yeah. I mean, as long as you're not a Heat fan and looking to rip me to shreds because I'm a Cavs guy, but yeah, absolutely, I'm down for any type of basketball talk.
And Derek, where can the good people follow you?
At QB class, class with a K. And then you can find some of my work here at Big Board Draft. This is where I put all my quarterback scouting reports, and then I also do a lot of work at Football Savages.
And Seth, rounding up with you, where can people follow Big Board Draft on Twitter, and where can they follow you on the Twitter?
Big Board Draft is at Big Board Draft. Like Matt said, we have some great writers. Everyone here that's on this podcast has contributed work for us. Excellent work. We have tons of great guys. I've been super blessed to have the staff that I've had to help me, grow the website, and they've put out some awesome work on there, and I'm really happy with that. And I thank all you guys for coming on. All my work's going to be on Big Board Draft. You can find me on Twitter at SethMurphy4991. Yeah, thanks guys for everything.
And obviously, before we go, I mean, Dylan Bishop wasn't able to make it on. He had Wi-Fi issues, but be sure to follow him. He provides draft tweets and coverage, so be sure to follow him at Draft Bishop. He's a good dude, absolutely worth the follow. And everyone, I just want to thank you again for listening, Ian, Derek, and Seth. Well, Seth, thank you for setting this up, but you guys, thank you for being a part of this.
Of course.
Thanks for having me. Yep.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thank you.
And farewell to Ian's cat as well.
She's off running around somewhere.
All right.